Most of the world is the working poor, and that's 4.5 billion people. In that 4.5 billion, you have 2.5 billion that are at the base of the pyramid that, for all intents and purposes, are operating outside of the normal financial ecosystems that you and I participate in. And so when we think broadly about innovation and the advent of new and emerging technologies, most of the world has a cell phone, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're getting the emerging innovation from the rest of the world's entrepreneurs and entrepreneurs and large corporations. It doesn't filter down to them because they are poor.
Is that you? You write quite a lot about this topic, and in one of the articles I was reading, you talk about the difference between digital and innovation. Is that kind of what you're getting at here?
Yeah. Just because you have access to a mobile phone and the internet does not mean that you're getting equal access to innovation, right? So particularly in Southeast Asia, where you have the majority of venture capital funding going into e-commerce sites and food delivery apps, right? How is that going to benefit a migrant worker or somebody at the base of the pyramid that earns less than $10 a day? They're not going to be ordering food, although they can download the app. Are they going to download Uber Eats, right? It just and banking applications and everything else, everything from Tinder to Facebook, although Facebook's a little bit different from a messaging perspective. But most of the world's entrepreneurs are focused on innovation, so building products and solutions that the rich can afford. Food delivery, in its current form, is an application for the rich.
Yes, absolutely. And I guess I think of places like Kenya or even other places in Africa where we know that the penetration of like mobile phone technology is fantastic. There's kind of the access to those handsets is not something that's a challenge. But I guess what you're getting at here is that the innovations that those kind of developers are creating using those technologies are simply focusing on a really narrow slice of the population worldwide and solving for their problems.
Yeah, I mean, the vast majority of venture capital going into startups does not address people that presumably don't have any money. We'll talk a little bit more about economic dead capital later on, but the presumption is, and they're very, very wrong in terms of particularly the working poor, that it's not an addressable market in terms of the applications that are being built, the innovations, particularly innovation in terms of these corporations that have these very large innovation departments, R&D teams. Like literally nobody's building, with the exception of very few people, are building for this base. And I think it's really, really kind of stupid, actually, when you have 4.5 billion people that are in this market segment that if you really look at the numbers, actually have very, very powerful economic power in the global ecosystem.
Yeah, so it's a potentially enormous user base for any new products being developed. Yeah.
Huge.
I mean, why is that? Why are the developers, or why is the venture capital kind of pouring into these particular types of developments and completely ignoring what we're kind of finding out here is actually an enormous potential opportunity? Yeah.
So look, there's a couple of perspectives I can offer, right? So I'm deep into the blockchain and cryptocurrency space, which is dominated by, cypherpunks and crypto anarchists. There is certainly an ideological belief, and I think this has been consistent throughout human history, is that those that are in power want to keep that power and keep the poor poor and keep the poor divided. So I think there's a political ideological belief, may or may not be founded in terms of the statistics behind it, but it's certainly a lot of the discussions that we've had over the years. The second piece, and fundamentally, it is this assumption that poor people don't have money.
Okay.
Like poor people, so if you look at, so Hernando de Soto is a very famous economist out of South America, and was looking at why people are poor and why people have been consistently poor. And there's a number of really good books, and I'll post in the links on this. But Hernando de Soto basically was able to break this down in terms of property rights. So if we look at historically why people remain poor is they don't have access to legally enforceable rights to the property in which they own, but may not be registered in a civil registry somewhere. And so when you look at most of the world's working poor, they have a farm, they have a village, they have a food stall, they have something that has been in their family for generations, or even multiples of generations, that they cannot loan against, that they cannot borrow against, they cannot establish credit against, because there's no civil registry stating that in fact they do own it. And if there is one, it's largely corrupt. Identity is a big one from a financial services perspective. Yeah. Another big one that we've worked on for a number of years and worked on with some very large insurance companies is health insurance for the poor in a peer-to-peer network. So utilizing blockchain technology with some other layers of artificial intelligence and advanced analytics to provide a peer-to-peer network of insurance for the poor. And what I mean by this, right, is if you're really at the base of the pyramid, where every single day that you work is absolute vital. If you don't work, you don't feed your family. What happens if that person gets injured or sick, right? If he loses 1 day of income, his family does not eat for that day. And so very, very low margins. Like, if this guy's, if he's making $10 a day, we're talking, 20 cents, 25 cents to provide coverage if he had an injury or catastrophic injury that his family's covered, for very nominal amounts that his family can actually eat while he's recuperating or she's recuperating. And that's very, very powerful stuff. So insurance, and again, you have to have identity, reputation, trust, and this is all built in how you use the blockchain technology. And trust me, man, the banks know about it. All right. So we've worked with some of the largest banks in the world, and particularly in Asia. And because of the way that they're structured, they cannot create or will not create or unable to create the new business model, the design of new business models to accommodate that. And that's, and there's some very, very, very good executives of some of these companies that see it and have pitched it and have ultimately had to move on from those banks because they knew this was the right thing. And they knew it was a really big moneymaker for the bank, right? So look, if you can actually lift, 150 million people out of poverty in Indonesia, right? And just by creating and structuring new programs, I mean, there's a huge win there. So there's some very, very good people working on it, but this stuff is hard, especially in large corporations, that they're just not set up to accommodate this type of change. Blockchain is a rich people's application. For now, if we look at where the technology and the application is being deployed, it's not yet. It was at very few instances hitting the base of the pyramid and most of the working poor. Yeah. It's just not there yet, right?
No. Do you think is it a case of, or maybe not a case, but a result of the fact that maybe a lot of the development and the kind of this entrepreneurial activity is happening outside of the locations where the benefit would be felt or is needed most? Do we need kind of more stimulation of the kind of skills and the capabilities to develop these solutions on the ground where they're needed?
Interesting point, right? So if we look at, we're a global company. We've been doing blockchain since 2012. We both invest in and build blockchain powered systems. We have a very robust deal network from around the world. Where we see most of the interesting innovation in terms of blockchain are coming from markets and countries that they're not as bad as Venezuela, but they might as well be, right? And so you have at least you have some development capabilities, some very strong developers, very strong cryptologists, computer scientists that are developing these applications relative to what's needed within their homeland, right? Because they see it, they see the corrupt governments. They see the challenges in banking. They see the challenges in property ownership, and they see where their world is headed. And they're actually developing things that focus on solving some of these problems. We don't see that in the US. We don't see it. We see some of it happening in Western Europe, but in the more developed, more mature first world markets, the focus, a lot of the focus is on how do we actually deploy the technology for enterprises? How do we make banks more money? Which is fine. I have nothing against it. And we're building applications and solutions and systems that help enterprises deploy the technology to engage in new markets, right? In how do you build technology that allows supply chains to be transparent, secure, and remove 50 different layers of corruption so that the farmer actually gets a bigger percentage of the pie that he's created. So it's happening.
Okay, well that's at least kind of gives reason for some optimism, and it's not all a negative picture that we're painting.
I'm a Debbie Downer, man. They call me in the company the dream crusher. Like I'm a total dream crusher. At the end of the day, look, you have some of the smartest people in the world working on some of this stuff. You have some very good big companies that are exploring it. The challenge, all right? So let's just be real, okay? I can't be any other way. The number one reason why you don't see these large-scale enterprise deployments in these organizations, beyond the things that we talked about, and this is it's a technology limitation. Existing blockchain protocols don't allow for the scalability, security, and governance that an enterprise needs in order to deploy it. Bitcoin does one thing really, really, really freaking good, and that's being able to exchange value in a peer-to-peer network. That's it. It does it phenomenally. Ethereum came into the market, all right, Vitalik Buterin, and created Ethereum, which allowed to take that functionality to one step further and said, okay, let's be able to add multiple people into that transaction. Whereas Bitcoin, I can send money to you to somebody else. I can bring, the producer into the conversation. All of us can enter into an agreement called a smart contract, and we can all interact without having to trust one another. Ethereum, by its own very design limitations, doesn't have the scalability to be able to work in a large financial institution or any other institution. So there's new protocols that are being built. Metabase is one, metabase.network. EOS is another one. Cardano is another one. So there's really amazing new protocols that address these scalability and governance challenges in enterprises so that if we can realign the human behaviors, the human factors, solve some of the technology problems, that we can actually have massive scalable deployments of the technology that can reach out to the rest of the world.